So, Claire Fox here, Academy of Ideas Director, and I'm delighted that we're doing a podcast on a subject that's very close to my heart, but also with people who I'm very privileged to be interviewing. So, on the subject, anybody who follows the Academy of Ideas will know that we have had some concerns about the intrusion of men into women's spaces, whether that's into sports teams, into school changing rooms, and recently and in the news has been NHS female nurses and staff being asked to change in situations where a male can share their changing rooms just by saying that that male identifies as a woman. So this is a big issue here in the UK, and it's all about the rights of women as far as I'm concerned. This, however, is a kind of issue that's internationally taken off. And I'm so excited because here with us on the podcast is Sall Grover and Katherine Deves, who are over from Australia. They've come a very long way. They are stars of, in a way, the internationally known legal case called Tickle versus Giggle, which is no, not some new comedy series. It sounds silly, it sounds comical, but actually there's nothing funny about what's happened in a very important legal case. And just before I start talking to them, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that Sall Grover lost her case. And she's going to tell us all about it. And so it's Katherine. But having lost the legal case, the headline in one newspaper that I read was, Australia has abolished womanhood. And basically noted that a judge had handed down a ruling that effectively eradicated sex in law in Australia by finding in favour of a man who was denied access to a women-only app, an online app. This is not, however, confined to Australia. So we're going to just now chat. Okay. Sall and Katherine, beyond that bare bones, do you want to take us through, tell us the story? And maybe, Sall, if you start off, because I don't think you set up your app trying to entrap some trans woman, man calling themselves a woman and so on.
No, not at all. So first of all, thank you so much for having us. So no, the app was actually an idea of my mum's and I. We came up with the idea in 2018. Basically, if anything, it's a response to Me Too. I had been a screenwriter in Hollywood for almost 10 years. Pre-Me Too, it's a cesspool. It's exactly as bad as everybody says. So I come back to Australia. I was quite a shell of a person. I went and did some therapy just to get some tools to be able to cope and deal with it and move on. And in therapy, she said to me one day, you need a strong female support network in your life. And it was this light bulb moment, because I literally played through everything that had happened to me and how it actually could have been different. Just in terms of having the support network, just taking away some sort of self-doubt, just being able to communicate with other women. And so I was talking to my mum about it, and she was like, why don't we create an app for women? And it was basically so that women could have a support network in the palm of their hand. It was in no way a response to gender ideology. I didn't know this was going on. And so we started developing the idea. It's a startup, so you do a friends and family investment round. You have to design the app, you have to build it. This is not my forte. I'm very lucky that I actually have a dad who understands all of this stuff, and he had a lot of people that he knew we could sort of bring in to help make it a reality. So that was sort of all 2019, and so I was very much in this world of just building the app. I wasn't really paying attention to what was happening anywhere else, just sort of in a bubble, working hard. And then we were on the App Store and Google Play in the beginning of 2020 it's called beta testing. So, security's not in there properly yet. You've still got lots of bugs, you're ironing it out. A handful of women around the world knew about it while we were testing. On the 7th of February 2020, so literally just past 5 years, we woke up one morning to thousands upon thousands of one-star reviews calling us transphobic, calling us TERFs. I'd never heard the word before. Just just bigotry, all of the buzzwords. I had no idea what was going on. My mum's, we've never been accused of anything like that before. We just didn't know what we had done wrong. So I decided to do some research. I can't remember exactly how I kicked it off, but I think I typed the word TERF actually into Twitter, I think. It might have been Google, I'm not sure. But that's when I just came across this sort of little corner of Twitter where women were saying men were claiming to be women. People were taking that seriously. They were saying that they were lesbians. And one of the things trans activists always tell you is like, educate yourself. And I'm like, well, that's a fair comment, like in a sense. Like I didn't know what I was dealing with. So I was like, I'm going to go and see if everything these women are saying is true. And so I just immersed myself in the writings of people like Jane Clare Jones, Helen Joyce, Julie Bindel, Suzanne Moore, and Kara Dansky in the US, and found that the evidence to back it up, that they weren't telling a word of a lie. Men were claiming to be women, and major institutions and governments were backing them on that. So I didn't start speaking out straight away. I really wanted to learn as much as I could. And then around when the J.K. Rowling, woman, there's a word for that tweet, I suppose she sort of inspired me a little bit. I was like, okay, maybe it's time. Like, I'm not going crazy.
But how did it become? I mean, so because this involves a particular one person kicked off this, right?
Well, so yes, so basically, that's the history of the app and how it came about. Yeah. And so that's 2020. So I said to my mum, let's just tread water. Don't do anything rash. We'll just tread water. This will blow over.
But why were they calling you transphobic then? That's what I'm trying to say.
Well,
how did that happen?
To be honest, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know how they found it. I have theories. I mean, do they search for it? How did they stumble across it? I don't know. But what we did have, because when we were trying to work out how you would even do a female-only space on the internet, you're like, well, how would you keep it female-only? And I just knew that there would be men who were trying to go on because, of course, there's just sort of bad actors out there that would try and do that. And it was actually my dad who found that there was this software. It's often called facial recognition. It's not facial recognition. It is actually sex recognition software. So it's not sort of recording your face in any way. There is the first way to tell if someone's male or female, obviously just by looking at them, but the human instinct and senses that we all have, there are sort of different points on a face. And so through AI, they were able to replicate essentially the human eye. And also then sort of in the back end of that AI, they've just got sort of a database of like thousands of millions of pictures of men and women. And so you can just have it set to an accuracy. You take a selfie and it says whether you're male or female. So I think that that's what the trans activists had a problem with, because it was the gatekeeping of the app was essentially saying there is a difference between a male human being and a female human being, because there is. But that's my own spin on it. That's my own.
Yeah,
I'm guessing, but I would say
I don't want to go kind of down a rabbit hole. And Katherine, do feel free to just put in it.
You
don't have to be confining you to the legal argument just because you're from the law. But actually, one of the first things I heard was that this was an app that used facial recognition, and I thought, I spend a lot of time arguing against the dangers of facial recognition technology in this country, which the government's trying to introduce because of matters of privacy. It's actually also not reliable necessarily on individuals, so you end up in a situation where the police will have people recorded and they'll pick the wrong people, racial bias, all the rest of it. So there's that. And then the other thing is just, I suppose, that the what makes you male or female isn't to do with your looks. So when I first heard this story, I was like panicking a bit, because I was thinking, and just before we started recording, I was just talking about the fact that, I was a tomboy, I've got short hair. I mean, now I'm just like an old woman, but, there's been times when you might say I looked archetypally like a boy rather than certainly my mother's view was that I was not ladylike enough, and so on and so forth. So there were caricatures. So I think I felt a bit anxious about the technology bit, but I don't want to get distracted by it, but I just thought I'd mention.
Yeah, I will just say one little thing about it. I mean, it is just, even if you are a tomboy as a girl, I mean, you're still female. There's still, you can just with the good old-fashioned human eye, tell the difference between a male and a female. Like, males and females do look different. We do know, when we're walking down the street, we do know. So while you can be a completely masculine woman or a very feminine man, there is still a sex-based difference in our faces, our bodies. There's something like 6,000 different
gene expressions
that are different between male and female. So
it's beyond just the biological differences that we're all now importantly asserting, because they can't change. There's also more superficial ways that you can just say you're a man or a woman. So you think maybe they got hold of this. So some guy who calls himself Roxanne.
Yes. So
tell us the story, but Katherine, also tell us when you join in this story as well.
So Sal and I had been aware of each other prior to this matter. The TERF community in Australia is quite small. But when Sal got the complaint the first time, she rang me and I wasn't in a position to represent her, so I did signpost her to Feminist Legal Clinic, who are now representing the lesbian action group, who are seeking to be interveners now in the matter. But then Tickle withdrew the complaint on the basis...
So just let's explain, because right. So Tickle is Roxanne Tickle.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Roxanne Tickle, I just want to be clear, as I understand it, has had gender affirmation surgery.
We don't know that for sure.
I read that, but we can't trust the media.
He's made the claim, but there's no evidence.
He is a trans activist, has gone to great lengths to pass as female at least, but it's changed, got a changed birth certificate, and he uses the phrase that he was signed male at birth, but is now Roxanne Tickle. Let's just do that. And joined your app.
Yes.
And eventually, after a while, the facial recognition said, hey up, you're a man.
No, basically what happened, so as I said, look, we were treading water. He came on during that time. Now, the AI was set to 94% accuracy. We would look every day. The only reason that he got onto the app, which, but men got on all the time and we just removed them, because technology isn't perfect, so that's why we'd always have human eyes behind the screen backing it up. It was more of a system to help us to be able to control it, because sometimes there'd be thousands upon thousands of men trying to get on. And so I would check every day. I'd be like, the onboarding, making sure it was just women only, and I'd also go at the end of every day to just see, just to check, just double check, has anyone gotten through. But the only way he would have been missed is that he literally wasn't using it. So he'd onboarded and then sort of not used it anymore. So when it can look like he was on there for quite a long time. Well, he had it on, he downloaded it on his phone for a long time, but he wasn't even opening it because it would have shown up on our end that there's a man there. Because I'd see them and I'd just remove them. So it wasn't like a character assessment of anybody. It wasn't a gender identity assessment. It was just, that is a male human being. This is for females only. Off you go. And so, I don't remember removing him because it wasn't an event. I removed many men. I have no idea when I would have done it. The only time he became... So you weren't saying... So you removed him as a man rather than as a trans activist or as a trans woman. Yeah. And I think that's significant because it's a women-only space. You remove men that lurk maybe in bad faith or by accident or just come on a women's only app to out of curiosity or some kind of voyeuristic pleasure or whatever reasons. But you don't think about that. You just remove them routinely. And Roxanne was one of the people removed. Tickle was one of the people. Yeah. And so he became a person of note in my life because I think it was October 2021, sorry. He called I got a call and a text from my phone from a number I didn't know saying my name is, it's something to the effect of my name is Roxanne Tickle, I'd been removed from the app. And so because I had his phone number, I just typed it into the server and a picture of a man came up and I was like, well, that's a man. And I called my dad and I said, there's a man that's been blocked from Giggle has got my phone number and called and texted my phone. And my dad just said, block his phone number and move on, forget about it. Because it creeped me out. Literally no one else has ever done this. So I did forget about it, and then in January 2022, I got an Australian Human Rights Commission complaint for gender identity discrimination, and that's when I called Kath straight away and was like, oh my God, what do I do? And it was basically in the Australian Human Rights Commission to settle it there. I would have had to let him on, let all men who claim to be women on the app, go to sex and gender education, moderate the content of the app so that men who claim to be women weren't offended by anything that the woman was saying, and pay him $20,000. And I said no.
And was there an apology as well?
Was I supposed to? I think maybe I was supposed to apologise at that point. And I thought, well, that's never going to happen. I didn't do anything wrong.
So I think that a couple of things that I think, and Kath, I will turn to you now to ask you a few questions, just that because I think that's the story, and then it becomes a big legal case. And I'm not saying we don't want to go through the whole legal case. I just want people to know the story. And the main thing is you lost. Dramatically.
Yes.
And we were all watching over in the UK because by this stage you'd been on Free Speech Nation with Andrew Doyle. I'd begun to pick up on the story, and credit to Andrew, I think, for giving you the publicity. But all of the UK turf island community were following this story, and in fact you did have very important witnesses at your trial who were UK feminists and turfs and so on. We can maybe talk about that. But anyway, one of the things that's really fascinates me about this is, so just to full disclosure, as it were, I am one of the people who was most critical of the Me Too movement, which I basically thought did a lot of harm for women's autonomy, women's independence, presented women as victims, and also, in the end, particularly in the UK anyway, relativised serious sexual assault with the trivial.
Yeah. So
I'm just saying that. I'm also not actually. I'm from the left, but I'm not actually traditionally a separatist feminist or anything. So I'm kind of not even. I'm not even somebody who'd be like arguing for women's groups and women's separate spaces. I never thought I'd have to think about whether I defended women's bathroom spaces or gender, because yes, of course I agree with that. But I mean, what I mean is politically. But despite that. Despite those things, one of the things that's really genuinely shocking is that women's rights, the history of women's liberation in the modern period, has come under assault from, as you've just pointed out, the Australian Human Rights Commission. And that suddenly women's rights are at odds with what other people would say are progressive human rights, and that somehow being on the side of the argument that fights for women's rights, and that incorporates people who are both separatist or people who went along with Me Too and people who didn't. That's what I'm saying. It's basic women's equality rights. Find themselves demonised by progressives as the bigots who are on the wrong side of history. So just mull over that for me.
So Australia has replicated a lot of what's happened in the UK. We have a version of Stonewall called ACON, which is the AIDS Council of New South Wales. Obviously, the AIDS crisis was brought under control. They needed to pivot to a new movement. And the amount of money that they now receive from our government is extraordinary. I think they have a budget of about $25 million a year at the moment. $17 million in government grants. A big portion of that is a direct special ministerial grant from the New South Wales Minister for Health. Now, they've replicated the whole Stonewall strategy by having a massive document for compliance that has to be done year on year that has been run through every single government department, Defence, Prime Minister's Office, Attorney General's Department, and that would have fed down to the Australian Human Rights Commission. But where things went really wrong in Australia was 2013, when amendments were made to our Sex Discrimination Act, where gender identity was put in level with sex. So we've been waiting for a case where this conflict which has been created to test whether, when sex-based rights are in conflict with the demands of men who assert a gender identity, who's going to take primacy? And in practicality, whenever there'd been documents, policy, access to sports, I mean, that's how I became involved. I first spoke publicly and became involved in 2019 and then 2020 when the Australian Human Rights Commission put out a sports guidelines that said that sports are going to be based on gender identity rather than biological sex for competitive categories, and also horrible things like sharing of change rooms and dormitories, and the parents aren't to know and the other athletes aren't to know, and and all the rest of it. So the Australian Human Rights Commission has been in this gender identity nonsense up to its neck for over a decade.
Yeah.
So they've expended enormous resource and time on embedding this into law and policy wherever they can. So they very much have a vested interest in defending that position. But, you know, to be standing there in court and seeing the instructed barrister for the sex discrimination commissioner being on the side of men, when the point of the Sex Discrimination Commissioner was to ensure that the Sex Discrimination Act, which was created for the benefit of allowing women in Australia to participate equally in public life with men and have the same opportunities and so forth, and they're standing there defending the men who shop in the women's department over women who are saying, all I want is a little corner of the internet where I won't get harassed, where I can talk about pregnancy or menstruation, where I don't have to look at porn or pics of anatomy, and they are saying no, you have to let these blokes in.
Well, I mean, the thing is, it's for me, it doesn't matter what women want to do when they get together.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to me what men want to do when they get together. Let them get on with it, right? And it can, you know, one doesn't need to have to justify it. But just in terms of what the kind of arguments that the judge used, because this is going to be very important both for you but maybe internationally. I mean, we have the Australian Human Rights Commission, and you explained brilliantly, Kath, I think, what the implications are in the way that this then redraws this issue somehow into this, ironically, the one thing that is binary is politics on this, which is if you're not on the side of trans ideology, you are to the right of Genghis Khan, you're far right, you're kind of some kind of bigot, and the progressive Be Kind brigade are all on the side of trans rights. But there were some extraordinary aspects in terms of the court case, because the judge actually has cemented in law that sex is
changeable.
Changeable. And this was like the shocking thing that happened, but also did have people at hand that could have called or listened to Kathleen Stark, Helen Joyce, Colin White. But tell me, kind of, why did these kind of voices of reason not make any impact?
Oh gosh, I mean, Bridie Nolan, who's the barrister, spent, hours arguing that these people needed to be listened to. And I have my own theory about it. It's that if you listened to them, you couldn't possibly rule against them.
So the judge basically ruled it. They weren't called as expert witnesses. Is that correct?
Dismissed the evidence. And we also had lay witness affidavits on of women from a variety of different backgrounds requiring female-only spaces for different reasons, and that was dealt with very briefly in one paragraph.
Yes.
And that lived experience was given very little weight compared to the applicant's lived experience.
Or assertion of lived experience.
Very asymmetrical.
Yes.
Yeah. So consequently, Tickle's Human Rights won the day and absolutely cemented. Is that correct, though? In Australian law, it is now declared that sex is changeable. And where does it leave the rest of us? Because I know that you're concerned that this can have international implications. You know, in some ways it's like, oh, what a sad story, sorry to all of you people in Australia, but why should I care? You know, and I know that the Academy of Ideas listeners are not so narrow-minded, but I mean, there is actually implications. Yeah? So do you want to explain?
Well, it's a novel area of law. This decision in trying to decide which has primacy, sex or gender identity, this is the highest court around the common law world where it has been decided. And in His Honour coming back with this decision, I'm sorry, I don't mean to go
every time I think about it, you have to laugh, otherwise you would literally cry.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
There's a couple of it. So he said, you know, sex is not binary, sex is changeable, and sex is defined not on your biological sex, but on how you maybe present or be perceived by other people. So very ephemeral, mutable, subjective. It's no longer rooted in reality, but where it has grave implications for other countries, like here in the UK, is the way within our body of law, you have to have heads of power within our constitution that enable the federal parliament to legislate for certain matters. So with the Sex Discrimination Act, it was the External Affairs power which allows the federal parliament to sign treaties on behalf of the Australian people. And when the Sex Discrimination Act was enacted in 1984, it was on CEDAW, so the United Nations Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. In 2011, they expanded that to include more of the international human rights treaties, such as the ICCPR, the International Civil and Political Rights Treaty. And within that treaty, Article 26, it says people cannot be discriminated against on the basis of a whole lot of categories, but they are discernible, they are objective, they are definable. So, race, religion, and so forth. But then they have at the end other status. So within the United Nations, people can take human rights complaints and it's decided by a tribunal. So, for example, there were people who went there saying their human rights had been intruded upon because they were trans or they had a gender identity. And that is a very specific set of circumstances specific to that person. But His Honour decided to rely on those decisions. So an international body that's not beholden, that's not answerable to the Australian people or Australian domestic law, who decided people had rights in relation to their gender identity and then fall into this bucket of other status. That's how he said, no, gender identity, even though it's not referred to in CEDAW, it's not actually referred to in any of the other treaties, but just this ephemeral other status. So that gives it validity. And His Honour decided to give more weight to the demands of someone with a gender identity than the sex-based rights of women. So that leaves us in a position in common law countries where we can have these international organisations. We know there's a whole lot of problems in a whole lot of areas, whether for immigration, for example, where we're signed up to these treaties, and we've got these faceless, unaccountable bureaucrats who are making decisions that are then impacting our domestic law. And
Right.
There's no way to hold these people to account. And some of these decisions might be against the will of the people. There's been no mandate for it. There's been no election. It wasn't an issue on an election campaign trail. But they're sitting there and we're now being beholden to them when we don't want them. So this has implications that go far beyond simply women's sex-based rights.
Yeah,
or
I think
just an app.
yeah, no, certainly where we started, it's kind of quite far down the line from where we started, where you started. I think a couple of things. I mean, I think that anti-democratic point's very important because, if I could just say, one of the things that I get anxious about, even when the law courts are used in our favour, as it were, is I don't always want my rights defined by judges.
Mm.
Now, you lost that case, but I don't always want to be dependent on winning cases in order to, for example, be told what I'm allowed to say. Very often now in this country, people will say, no, I have the legal right to be gender critical because of the Maya Forstater case. And it's like, well, actually, I always did have the right to be gender critical, and I don't necessarily want it to be entirely dependent. I'm glad that, I mean, hurrah that Maya won, and I have been known to say exactly that, my legitimate belief as protected characteristic. But I mean, it feels a rather weak argument for free speech to be dependent on the law in that way. And so I did want to talk to you about that because lawfare is used on all sides, isn't it? And I mean, obviously, Kath, you're involved in the law. You've been on the receiving end of it, Sal. It doesn't always feel a satisfactory way of sorting things out. So just to kind of move on to the final bit. On the one hand, you lost this law case, but I assume as well that even if you'd won it, there was a terrible cost to pay by this guy, by Roxanne, taking you to court, because the process is often the punishment, right? Because they really labelled you during that time. I mean, I saw some of the absolutely vile, misogynistic rantings that you went through in the build-up to then losing as well. I mean, that process is pretty punishing, isn't it?
I don't pay attention to it.
Right. Oh, well,
At all.
God.
I literally don't pay attention to it.
Oh,
because I know
good.
I know I'm right.
Oh,
It doesn't
very
matter what
good.
they say, men aren't women. I know it is so rare in life to know that you are right about something.
Yeah, yeah.
Usually we have like some humility and some doubt because we could be wrong. There is absolutely no way men are women. So I don't care what they say.
So the court, but that's an inspiring one, listeners, viewers. But on the other hand, in terms of the law court stuff, you're about to enter into another phase of law. Yeah. Because that's what I'm saying is I just feel like, oh God, you know, the last thing you need is this. So explain to us how we're back in court, because it's lovely to have you in the UK, but you're actually here because you're doing a tour because you need to raise a lot of money for a start off. But why? What's happened? Give us an update.
Well, so we're appealing the decision because sex is not changeable.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, I do agree with you. I wish that we didn't have to rely on laws for all of this stuff. I think some of it is just such common sense, and people should be able to have their freedoms. I think men should have men's spaces, have trans-only spaces. I don't care. Women have women-only spaces. Like, this should be something we can just sort out on our own in society. But it's just not the framework we're working in. So we're appealing. At the moment we're appealing to the full federal court, and then if that will be, we've got a case management hearing tomorrow to just establish, just boring law stuff. The actual hearing will be later this year. It's worth noting that Tickle is also appealing.
Yeah.
So he's cross-appealing the decision. He's appealing the decision he won. He wants it upgraded from indirect discrimination to direct discrimination, and he wants the damages upgraded from $10,000 to at least $30,000 and aggravated damages of $10,000. So we're going into battle for that. And in terms of the process of the punishment and the toll of it, the thing is, and because I'm not in Australia, I'm going to get emotional because, I got the Human Rights Commission complaint when I was 15 weeks pregnant, and this has been the entirety of my daughter's life.
God, that's incredible, isn't it?
And by the time I finished in the High Court, she could be 5.
Yeah.
And so, I think these are the golden years, and I will never get them back. And so I will never forgive the Australian Human Rights Commission for this. I should never have had to do this. And I just miss her so much. I shouldn't have to travel the world to raise awareness.
I understand that, Sal, but she's a young girl.
Yeah,
and if they were not champions of young girls and women's rights, she will be very proud of what you've done. It's not like as though you've been slumming it off the pub, right?
There's a bit of that.
I was just going to say, and I wouldn't blame you if there was a bit of that, right? So I'm not. She wouldn't mind that either. But what I'm trying to say is, let me tell you, this is what being a mother is actually about, right? Taking a bloody hit for your daughter and for children to come. But anyway, Kath, just on the lawfare part, it's terrible. Bloody hell. Yeah. Who does this Roxanne Tickle think he is? He doesn't. I don't even believe it. He's using the courts. This is so obviously a mischievous intervention in this process to get more money and so on and so forth. It's infuriating that you have to put up with that at the same time as trying to sensibly have a rational discussion on the difference between sex as a biological reality and gender.
Yeah, that's correct. We're also operating in a very hostile political atmosphere. We have a federal election coming up, and we had our Health Minister, Mike Butler, come out yesterday still saying there isn't a problem. There's nothing to see here. This isn't an issue in Australia. And I would like to turn around and say to the numerous little girls I know in my life, I'm the mother of 3 little girls, and this is why I joined the fight, because I thought when they destroyed women's rights in Australia, when we were no longer recognised in law, and I have my future granddaughters saying to me, "What did you do, Grandma?" And I say, "Well, let me tell you a story." I ended up with 24/7 security at one point. So, when we look at this, we're in this hostile environment, and we also have a media that is not only just hostile, but they are still at the no debate stage. the ABC, which is the equivalent of the BBC, they are still just pretending that this isn't happening. And
it's like, if you would say with Mark Butler yesterday, or if any of the media said that there's no issue, we don't want to import Trumpian politics, that's the new one, we don't want to engage in a culture war, and it's like, okay, if there's no problem, then let the AHRC know. Because I've been in court for 3 years. There's other women. Kira Lee Smith has had 9 different complaints about her because she's calling out men in women's sports. These women's lives are being taken over by this.
But that's what's so infuriating. Those people who say, well, they're still saying it in this country, which is, we don't want to play the culture wars.
Yeah.
And therefore, you are not allowed to raise this issue, and if you do, you're a bigot.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you're the one playing the part. I never started this. Right?
Yeah, you created the culture war. I'm responding to it.
Just, it's interesting on the Trump thing. Maybe this is a way that we can just begin to round up, because round up is at work by thinking about the future. The Trump vibes thing is interesting. You know, it's bound to actually. There's a defensiveness that you'll find in is what Australia. It'll be here, but actually, it's actually going to probably have a bit of an impact, because it is stunning.
Yeah. Yes.
That even somebody who I never thought I'd cheer an American president of any description, certainly not Republican, definitely not Trump.
Yeah.
But when he issued that executive order on sex versus gender, there are 2 sexes, when he the other day had all those young athletes around him and he guaranteed women only sport. I mean, I was
emotional,
tearful. You just thought, and I was like going, yes, and you just think, God Almighty. But then, actually, how disgraceful, by the way, that people from my side of politics, on the left, allowed a situation where he's the hero of the hour, and he deserves to be given credit. But anyway, in Australia, there will be.
It's crazy.
Exactly. But it will actually have an impact, you think, in Australia eventually. I mean, they can say we're not that, but actually changes the conversation, does it not?
It definitely will, and it is flowing down. And when a society can't protect its little girls, it's failed. I mean, little girls have the right to have rights commensurate with everybody else. And I think, we have to have our own Leah Thomas in the sports arena. But what you do find in Australia is you've got the inner city elites who work for corporates, who work for bureaucracies. They're either signed up ideologues or they have to toe the party line because that's where their paycheck comes from. But the moment you get out of there, where I live in the suburbs, my husband's a tradie. When you're talking to the guys in the high vis, when you're talking to the ordinary people on the side of the sports fields or out in the regional and rural areas, they just say it's all gone too far. So you would be a fool if you were running in politics in Australia if you did not see the political capital that just standing up and talking plainly, common sense, and just slaying the Transborg on the field of the battleground of the culture wars.
And by the way, because none of us, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if people want to identify as the opposite gender and call themselves trans, or want to identify with whatever they want, feel free. I'm a liberal, right? And I might think it's odd. I might think any number of things, but who cares what I think? Like, that might be a prejudice, right? What is absolutely clear is that should not be allowed to impinge on rights, and that's what we're talking about. That's what I'm saying is it feels to me demeaning that I have to explain in the public sphere why I know what a woman is, and that I think that, for example, a rape crisis centre should be for women only, biologically. And then you have to say, when I say women, you can't even say single sex women, because I've done that in the House of Lords, and the minister said, we agree with you, and then they don't mean that, because what they mean is women is now the category that also incorporates in trans women. So then you have to say women, biological women, women app. And I think, God, I used to be able to just say the word woman or women and everybody know what I meant. But anyway, it's demeaning that we have to do it, but it's so important to recognise that it was precisely because we kind of didn't do that we didn't realise what was happening, that actually a number of our rights have been undermined and a number of assumptions have gone, and a number of our young women, I'm sad to say, are themselves completely caught up in this. Some of them, sadly, brutally, having double mastectomies, denying their puberty because they are feeling unhappy in puberty and then think they were born in the wrong body because adults told them that. Or young women who were the political activists that we all were at some point in our teens when we were very idealistic, who think the way to be on the side of the angels and not anti-bigotry is to be pro-trans and not realise that they're undermining women's rights. We've really, really got to turn this story round, and I think that that's what you're doing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And this is an international campaign. I mean, how can we support you now? I mean, what's your next moves? You're here in the UK. What are you doing that we can practically give you a bit of a help with?
The two main things to be able to support the case are to tell people about it so that people are aware of it, because I think that people power is the most important one. The second one is obviously we're crowdfunding to pay for it. This is going to be upwards of $1 million. If we go to the High Court, I don't even want to think about it. The first round was just over $500,000. This one is shaping up to be this just specific round is shaping up to be the same. It has been through the kindness of strangers all around the world who've been able to do this. I mean, I started a startup. I don't have $1 million sitting around to go and pay legal fees. And that's why I say telling people, because even if, say, you financially can't support it, just telling people helps in spreading the word. Because I would rather, 100,000 people giving $10 than one person coming along and doing the whole thing.
Don't turn down that one person.
Well, I'm not stupid.
Listen, Elon Musk, if you're listening, feel free.
Yeah, I'm no fool. However, I think that the most important thing is people being invested in something and fighting back, and everybody standing up and saying, no, we don't want to be told what to think, we don't want to be told what to say, we don't want to be told what to see.
Yeah, and also, Kath, you made the point, that this is a great populist cause. Ordinary working people around the world are showing that some of the most damaging aspects of identity politics and the assaults on free speech and the attempt at demonising people by calling them bigots, racist, Islamophobic, transphobic, all of the things that we know are used to silence people. People have had enough. I mean, they voted for Donald Trump, even though many of them didn't even like Donald Trump, but they saw it as a bloody nose for Kamala Harris style, we know better than you politics. And it's ordinary people in this country who are at the moment are just saying, for God's sake, we need something different, a new kind of politics. And so it's those people with their $10 or their couple of dollars, that's what you're saying is, it's almost like even if it's not the money, it's more about mobilising that support and getting the word out. Yeah?
Because, I mean, there's going to be so many more cases, there's so many different areas that need to be fixed, and if we have millions of people around the world engaged in the issue, it's actually easier to fix them. That's how you create political change. You put pressure on legislators. Yeah. It's that has legs and a long lifespan rather than just one person coming along.
I rather like the fact, Sal, that you said when you started thinking about this issue, when you, as somebody said, educate yourself, and then one of the people you read was
Suzanne Moore.
Yes. God. Suzanne Moore. It's one of those brilliant things, isn't it? You read Suzanne Moore, and now Suzanne Moore wants to interview you.
Oh,
and for our listeners, by the way, we will also be putting links, so we'll make sure that you get to see that Suzanne Moore interview.
Yeah, I mean, one of probably the only silver lining of this madness is the amazing women that you've met and been introduced to and met all around the world. And it's you get, if you are, I suppose, lucky enough to meet your heroes. I met Suzanne Moore last time when I was here, and she's one of the funniest women I've ever met, so I'm very excited to see her again tomorrow.
Great.
I mean, just the amount of women that have spoken out on this issue that are, I think, some of the smartest women in the world. Like, for example, I think for a long time everyone was wondering, like, who's going to be the next sort of Hitchens type person. Like, I think it's Helen Joyce. Like, women, they're always looking to men. But it's like, no, this issue, one thing it's done is given really intellectual women a space to speak out on, granted, the stupidest premise possible, but actually show that there's just great work of women and that there's a solidarity that we will all come together. And I know that there are some that are against us, but I think for a lot of them, it's because they see what happens when you speak out, so it's a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
And once it's really safe, they'll pretend they never believe
But I do think you're right. I mean, it's brought to the fore some amazing voices that maybe we wouldn't have heard in the same way. And I mean, I feel similarly about Kathleen Stock, but there's too many to mention. It's embarrassing now to have not done a whole list and a whole litany. And in fact, there were people there this morning when we had a gathering at the House of Lords who I thought, there's some real, genuine heroes and heroines of free speech and women's rights here. Kath, is there anything that we can be doing in terms of following the case? I mean, do you kind of give us your website, or is there a kind of legal way that we can also follow, not legal, but you know what I mean, like follow the legal proceedings, I mean, rather than it?
So we do have, Sal has her website, Giggle Crowdfund, and that has just been updated. So if people want to read about the history and why this is important, there's a whole lot more material there. Of course, you can always follow Sal on X, Sal tweets. I'm also on X as Deves_Katherine. But with respect to the matter, because it is a public interest case, at first instance, the judge published the documents that were filed in the matter. So you can also go to the Federal Court of Australia website to see those documents. I'm presuming that will probably happen for the appeal as well. And then what we would like to see when the appeal is actually scheduled, which will probably be the July-August sitting, is that it is broadcast on the Federal Court YouTube. So if you've donated your $10, you can have your ticket and you can watch the proceedings. So, but if you'd like to be updated on that, certainly follow Sal on X.
Brilliant. Thank you both very much. And obviously, I'd hope that if you haven't already, that you sign on to our Academy of Ideas YouTube channel as well, and sign up for our Substack, which is free, but you can always give us some money if you've got any spare. But we will try and follow this case because I think it is very important. And whenever you get any publicity, we'll also try and put links in on our Substack so that our viewers, our listeners and our readers and attendees at Academy of Ideas events know what's going on. And I hope that you win, of course, that you aren't bankrupt. I hope, of course, that this is not going to devastate your lives in any way more than it has to, because it already has had such a big impact, as we heard so movingly from Sal. But I also think this fight is so important that you can just be proud of yourselves, and we'll kind of cheer you on. We want you to win. When you win, do come back and speak at the Battle of Ideas, because then you can visit the UK without feeling you're kind of going and doing your story. You can actually come and be one of those intellectual, both of you, intellectual women who are just talking out on the issue without talking about yourselves.
Oh, God,
right?
Wait.
Exactly. So that's an invitation that you can kind of keep close to your heart. But in the meantime, good luck and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us on.